Hi guys and welcome back to my channel. Now what we have here today is Hidizs AP80 Pro X. And this is basically a good old-fashioned DAP, which is an independent audio player. And when I say independent, I mean you don't have to use your smartphone or PC or laptop or tablet as a source of your music, because this is a fully functional separate device. And I'll quickly turn it on so you can see it has an LCD display. It's an IPS panel, 2.4 inches. It has its own OS and its own player, and you store the music here on an SD card, which can be as big as 512 gigabytes, which is quite a lot. And on the other side of the unit you can see a volume knob as well as 3 buttons. One will pause and play the music, while other 2 will skip to the next track or the previous one. And everything else you do on a touch screen itself, because it's just easier that way. And while mentioning what else you can do with this device, there is a lot of options, and I simply don't want to go through all of them. I'll mainly focus on the music and audio-oriented things and the sound fidelity and how you can alter it. So I'm just not going to get into step counter or ebook reader and things like that. I'll focus on its main purpose, and that's playing music. And while on the topic of music, you can actually listen to that by connecting headphones either to 3.5mm single-ended output or 2.5mm balanced output. And as expected, balanced output will provide more power into your headphones. I'll put power rating on the screen, but I wanted to say that even single-ended out is quite decent and sufficient for most of in-ears that I've used and I've tested this device with. And the last thing to mention regarding inputs and outputs is the USB. And this one is both input and output depending on how you need it to be. So very obvious use is to charge the device. And you charge it with any phone charger, 5 volts DC, that's it. But you can also connect an external DAC, so you can use this as a digital source, digital platform, and actually use external DAC, which I don't believe many of you will be using, because this player has a great Sabre DAC inside. Actually, it has 2 of them, working on both stereo channels each, and this device sounds really nice. So that part with external DAC, I don't think many of us will use that. But maybe more interesting is that you can also use it to attach external digital source, such as your smartphone, and use this player as a DAC only. So in that case, you're not using its internal files, internal player, it just turns into a DAC. You connect it to your phone just like any other DAC, and you play music through it. And this feature I do find useful because, for example, you can watch YouTube on your smartphone or stream music or do anything that is not music files located inside of the storage of this player itself. And in that case, it can just act as a DAC to your smartphone or any other digital source. And that increases its versatility. Now, when it comes to the OS itself, this thing is powered by hibi operating system and also hibi player. And I find it quite easy to use. Everything that's necessary for browsing the files, folders, sorting by artists or albums, things like that, everything works just fine, but it also has some pretty advanced features. For example, there is MSEB EQ function, and that's on top of traditional equalizer. So MSEB will let you tune a lot of parameters regarding the sound quality. And just few of things to mention are overall temperature. Would you like your sound to be warmer and darker or brighter? Bass extension, bass texture, vocals, female overtones, sibilance, etc., etc. There are more things here. And while some purists, me included, will say like, oh, the heck with that, I want my music as neutral and as flat as possible. That's all nice and dandy, but if you want, you can alter the sound tonality quite significantly using these sliders. So to finish this features section, I also wanted to mention that it supports all sorts of files. I tried playing DSD through it, both in terms of images, ISO images, and DSF files. It worked perfectly. High-resolution PCMs worked perfectly again. You can even play MQA if you want to do so. And there is even bidirectional Bluetooth connectivity on board. So you can connect this, you can pair it to your smartphone. You can also pair it to your earphones. It works both ways, so it's bidirectional. It supports LDAC if that's of any importance to you. You already realized there's a lot of things this little device can do and a lot of protocols and features and files that it supports. So how does AP80 Pro X, wow, that's a mouthful, sound? Well, in short, it sounds good and neutral. What that means is that I really couldn't notice any tonality biases. For example, bassline is present. It doesn't sound lean to my ears, but it doesn't sound heavy or emphasized either. Well, unless you choose to do so in the EQ or MSEB options. But by default, it sounds quite neutral and nicely resolving. Mid-range is also, it just sounds natural and as present as it should be. And the same goes for the highest spectrum. It's well present, but it's not a thing that jumps out at you. This player doesn't do that. It's actually on the softer, milder side of things when it comes to how this player presents edges and sharp detailing in the recording. I feel that I can hear a lot of details, the detail retrieval is really nice, but it doesn't sound sharp or edgy. That basically never happens. So it has this kind of smooth tonality, smooth natural quality to it. And if you've seen my previous reviews of Hidizs gear, for example, like the H80S Pro, which is a traditional DAC, it's not a DAP, you probably already know that I said that about this DAC too, and I really liked that part of the character. And it really stands true for AP80 Pro X here too. And in terms of sound staging, that's also again pretty decent. I feel that everything is reasonably wide and deep. It's not one of those in-your-face sounding devices. It actually has a nice amount of like relaxed free space around you, and layering is done really nice, so is separation of the instruments. I don't feel that anything is melting with anything else. All tones are really nicely separated, they occupy their own position, and there's really nothing to complain there. And lastly, dynamics. That's quite okay, and AP80 Pro X is not a champion when it comes to like dynamic swings and just overall punchiness. If you really like a strong kick and slam in your sound, this DAP will probably not provide much in terms of that kind of excitement. But as I mentioned previously, the upside of that is that it sounds really natural and really smooth, never sharp, never too grabby and in your face, because those kind of punchy and slammy sounding devices can be some of that or all of that. So I believe that in terms of tonality, dynamics and detail retrieval, this will be most suited for someone that appreciates really detailed but really natural and smooth sounding device. That will never introduce this sort of digital sharpness and hardness and become tiring after longer listening sessions. So I went on and compared it to few DACs. So not DAPs, because I don't have any other DAP. I don't have any other independent player so that I can compare it to. So I actually took few DACs that are in a similar price range, but they need smartphone to actually function, because I just wanted to put the sound of this device into context with some devices that I'm familiar with and maybe you're familiar with. So, for example, Hidizs DH80S, that is a battery-powered DAC. You have to connect it to your phone because you cannot use it otherwise. And also with this Audirect Beam 3 Pro DAC, both of these are $150, slightly cheaper than AP80 Pro X, but again, you need phone for these. You cannot use them just by themselves. Well, I'll start with this. If you're using internal storage of AP80 Pro X, which I think is the point, unless why buying DAP, it can roughly match these DACs. Well, maybe not completely. These can still just pull out a little bit more details and edge transients and things like that when you're using same quality files on your phone and on this DAP. These dedicated DACs just pull ahead slightly in terms of resolution and how resolving they are, but they're all in quite similar ballpark. And for example, if you would use on your smartphone a streaming service, and I mean a good one, not Spotify with its lossy files that sounds quite bad, but something really good like Qobuz or Tidal, then you get slight degradation in sound compared to local files. And then these three are completely matched in terms of sound fidelity. Because that slight loss of resolution and sharpness and transient clarity that's happening on a smartphone when it's streaming your music, that was how little it was necessary to bring these two down to the level of AP80 Pro. And in my mind and to my ears, that's pretty good sound quality. I can definitely listen to this device without ever regretting not having a little bit better DAC. So basically this all-in-one solution that doesn't need any external source can roughly match these two DACs that need a smartphone to function. But what if you decide to use this one as a DAC with your smartphone for some reason? Let's say to stream music for one of these, Qobuz, Tidal, Spotify. But seriously, Spotify is by far the worst digital source there. So if you have these kind of nice pieces of gear and earphones, headphones, I strongly suggest trying out something like Tidal and Qobuz because they really raised the level of fidelity compared to Spotify. Anyways, if you decide to use this one as a DAC connected to a smartphone, streaming from a smartphone, it cannot really match the sound fidelity of these dedicated DACs. Because sound fidelity takes quite a bit of hit when you move from these internally stored files on a DAP to using smartphone as an external digital source. In that case, these two dedicated separate DACs are definitely taking a lead, and it is noticeable because AP80 Pro X loses a little bit of clarity, a little bit of dynamics and overall punch, and just sounds flatter and more bland than either of these two dedicated DACs, or just simply when you compare that connection with a smartphone to internal files on the device, because that sounds clearly better. But I don't see that as a big problem because honestly, again, I was thinking like if you are buying a DAP with its own screen and its own operating system and player and controls and everything, why would you attach a smartphone to it? I suppose this is for people who really appreciate having an independent device that will not drain your phone and, I don't know, just occupy your phone, and that will not make you carry additional cables for connecting these two, and will not make you to connect two differently sized devices and somehow try to hold them together with a rubber band or magnetic tags or whatever. So that actually made me think, who is this device for and who could I recommend it to? And to be perfectly honest, my first thought was, wow, this is so last century. I remember when I was a college student and I used to have these sort of audio players, carrying them in pockets. They usually had much lower memory capacity at that time and were not as good sounding as today's devices, not even close. But I used those because phones, and that was even in the pre-smartphone era, yeah, I'm that old, phones didn't do high-resolution streaming and high-quality streaming, and they also had like really small displays and small memory capacity. Portable DACs, like these dongles, were not even a thing back then. That was even before Dragonfly and HRT, that were like pioneers in terms of these small DACs, and because of that it made sense to own a dedicated audio player. But today I'm wondering, like, if I can get a small DAC dongle, just attach it to my phone, why would I need this? And actually the answer came by itself with several days of using this device. I actually thought that I'm not going to like it, but I liked it more than I expected, because for some reason I just felt at ease. When I went outside, I didn't need to connect this to my phone to listen to the music. And when my phone is ringing, I didn't need to somehow grab both of these and pull them out of my pocket, watching like, oh, is this thing going to fall apart or what? So my phone and its functions were completely separate from my music. And for example, I would listen to this in the public transport, while at the same time browsing something else on a smartphone. Well, of course, you can also do that with a DAC attached to your phone, but is not as comfortable. But also, playing music on this one does not drain any battery on my phone, because these are completely separate devices. And lastly, when I go jogging, which I rarely ever do, but let's pretend that I jog a lot and often for the purpose of this review, I find this much more convenient, because if I put a smartphone and an external DAC somehow connected together, that becomes quite bulky and unwieldy in most of my pockets, while this one is so small that I can put it in a really shallow pocket or just in a hoodie pocket, and I'm certain that it will stay there. It will not fall out of the pocket, jump out, break. So I really experienced a sense of ease and like going back to simpler ways with this. I did miss streaming services. I did get a little bit spoiled by these smartphones and Tidals and Kobazis and like millions songs at my reach, but this somehow brought another type of joy into my daily routine of listening to music. And I was definitely more eager to listen to the music when I go outside to do something that I felt smartphone and the DAC would just be too bulky and unwieldy. And this was just much more approachable. Basically, I quite liked it, and most importantly, I liked it for the different reasons compared to DACs that you have to use with your phones. So that would be all for today, guys. And I'm interested if you have some time to share, how do you personally feel about DAPs? Do you find there is room on the market for them? Do you find them useful and maybe for some reasons even more approachable or cozy to use than portable DACs? So please write your opinions in the comments and see you next time. Bye!